Hello there and welcome to the Star Wars Showcase YouTube channel and the next installment in our 10-year look back series. This time around we're taking a look at the Red Line, which is where the Black Series really started to hit its stride and really began to develop into the mainline series that we know it as today. Now before we get into the good, the bad, and the ugly, as we do in these retrospective videos, the first thing I wanted to talk about was a little bit of kind of the historical bookends that are on either side of the Red Line. Now, the Red Line began in 2015 and was really just a packaging update from the Blue Line releases that had been coming out for the last couple of years. But looking at the state of Star Wars and of Star Wars collecting at 2015, the last couple of years before that had been pretty lean. The Disney acquisition took place in 2012, and the 3 years in between that and the release of the Red Line were really quiet years. A lot of the 3 3/4 figures that, looking back at that time, many had called the golden age of Star Wars collecting, 2008 to 2012, where you had the Legacy line, you had Sega Legends, you had all of the Clone War cartoon releases. It was a really great time for collecting, and it really began to taper off in 2012. And so for 3 years, the 3 3/4 collecting scene had gotten really quiet, and while the Black Series had just kind of started, it was still really trying to find its footing. And this updated packaging, this evolution from the Black Series Blue Line to the Red Line, I think we can directly attribute to the release of The Force Awakens. And I know for many, the sequel trilogy is controversial. There are fans, there are people who are not fans. I definitely do believe there's a lot to critique, but at the same time, I think we do have to look back and say that the sequel trilogy, as well as all of the new merchandise it brought to Star Wars, really revitalized, I think, a lot of these different action figure lines and really helped the Black Series become what it is today. I think without The Force Awakens, that action figure collecting for Star Wars would have continued to exist kind of in that doldrum state, where you get a couple of new releases, but it's honestly a lot of recycling of more and more things that we had already seen before. And I think that's something important for us to note, that for many of these collecting lines, they do require new merchandise to come out. They require new media, as that often fuels a lot of new people and a lot of new collectors coming into the hobby. And for me personally, the Red Line is actually where I started collecting the Star Wars Black Series. I was a college student. I had just gotten, a semi-real job and had a decent, amount of disposable income. And I saw a Force Awakens First Order Stormtrooper. And I picked that up really just for old time's sake. I had collected, the Power of the Force line in the 90s and had done some 3 3/4 inch collecting, all the way up into high school, but I eventually had tapered off and I'd stopped collecting for several years. And it was just on a whim that I picked up one of those new Stormtroopers for my desk. I wanted something that was a little bit, bigger, a little bit more detailed, and I'd grabbed that for, it was like 18, 20 bucks. And I think that kind of goes to show that it was, The Force Awakens and this new media that kind of opened my eyes to, here's this thing I kind of used to do, and I'd love to get back into. And from getting that first Stormtrooper, I think I had him for a week before I was already starting to place orders for, additional Force Awakens figures, getting excited and getting, Rey and Kylo Ren and all these other characters. That for me was really a watershed moment. On the other end of the Red Line, kind of that second historical bookend, when the line began to transition at the very end of its life cycle, it was 2018, which was right around the time that The Mandalorian was releasing its first season. And I think that's another important moment for Star Wars and Star Wars collecting, as In the span of the Red Line, we saw the release of our sequel films. We saw Rogue One and Solo and Star Wars Rebels, all of these great, movies, all of these different forms of media, and different characters and stories. But I think the release of The Mandalorian was another evolution for Star Wars as a whole, as these Disney Plus series, these once a week episodes, with now the release of, I guess it's Mandalorian, it's Kenobi, the Book of Boba Fett, and Andor. We're starting to see kind of a push towards this streaming television format being kind of the new accepted format for these Star Wars stories. And so at the very tail end of the Red Line, we start to see, the industry and all of these different stories moving in that new direction. And so for us, as we look back, I think the Red Line is a great... it's a great way to look at kind of that evolution from film to series to all of these new characters, all of it's being kind of encompassed in this 3-year span, in the release of a lot of really fantastic action figures. So, I've monologued there enough on kind of the bookends for the Red Line. Let's actually get into the line itself here. Let's start with the good for our Red Line releases, and there were a lot of them, considering that this line ran for nearly 3 years. But I think one of the fantastic things that we saw about halfway through the Red Line's life cycle was the use of photoreal technology. And this is now a standard for Hasbro across all of their different lines. But what photoreal technology does is for your characters' faces, when we're doing paint applications, they now apply it through a series of tiny little microscopic paint dots. And so you do a ton of these little dots as opposed to just like one, singular color over a face. And by doing that, you're able to add a lot more nuance and details to these characters' faces. And that is a huge step forward in terms of getting detail right on many of our Red Line releases' faces here. I think before that, if you look at our Orange Line and our Blue Line releases, those head sculpts and those faces do not hold up to the releases that we're getting today. And it's really thanks to this new technology that, if I remember right, we first saw for a Captain Rex release. I think DJ from The Last Jedi was one of the first characters to get it, as well as the Island Journey Rey. And those were all fantastic figures, and that's a technology that's carried over and now been applied to, Marvel Legends and Power Rangers. We're seeing this across all of Hasbro's different releases. And this was a real game changer in terms of getting great character faces out there. That's not to say that the technology is perfected yet. I think there's still a lot of characters like Han Solo and Luke Skywalker. I think there's something about perhaps Mark Hamill's face or Harrison Ford's face that just makes it hard to capture in this forum. But I still think the technology has come leaps and bounds forward in just the last couple of years. And I do think it's going to continue to improve release over release looking forward as well. I think something else that the Red Line really did well is the different waves that were released. Waves for the Black Series usually encompass anywhere from 3 to 6 or 7 new figures that are all released in a time. They're shipped to a store, and for, usually a couple of months, you'll just be on the lookout for that one wave, 5, 6, 7 new figures that you might be looking to add to your collection. And the Red Line had some really fantastic waves with a lot of diversity spread across them too. And I think this really just speaks to the fact that there was a lot of new media, a lot of new stories that were coming out. And so each new wave might feature, 1, 2, 3 figures from a new movie. It might feature a character from a book or from, Star Wars Rebels. And then we might have an old, throwback originally trilogy figure. And all of those together really helped when you had, 8 figures as part of a wave, you'd have this really great mix of some new, some updated, some old, some deep cut. And that meant for, your average collector, there was really something for everybody. If you were just looking for one character, you could usually find one in each wave that would interest you. If you were looking for, I'm just a fan of the movies or I'm just a fan of the shows, there was something there for you too. And I think this was really great to get these really, really diverse character-driven waves, where I think there was always something that you would be interested in. And I do think that that's one of the strengths that the Black Series has carried over since the Red Line, is for many of our new wave releases, we get a really good mix of things. We got, I think just as of late, you're getting obviously a lot of Mandalorian figures because that's kind of the new hot thing, but you're also getting some Andor figures thrown in. We're getting more, Return of the Jedi figures. We're starting to get more deep cuts when it comes to things like, Darth Malak or Bastila Shan from the Knights of the Old Republic games. And I really think for new waves, it's great to get a good mix of things. It puts something for everybody out there. I've heard some people say, I wish they would do a just clone trooper wave or a Jedi wave. And I kind of disagree with that sentiment. I like getting a good mix of things. I think it keeps people's interest for longer. And if you think about it from the side of, Hasbro as a corporate entity, and I know no one likes to do this, but if you break it down that way, it keeps people interested for a longer amount of time within the releases of products, even if you're only buying 1 to 2 things. I think mixing them up, kind of stretching out those timelines, I think it's something that's obviously good for that company, but I also think it's something good for the hobby as well. Now, let's transition to the bad, some of the weaknesses of the Red Line. And I think one thing that we could point to is the Red Line had a lot of growth. We got a ton of new releases. The line was hitting its stride, and all of a sudden the Black Series was getting releases that even the Heritage 3 3/4 scale weren't getting. But I think with a lot of that growth comes some of the weaknesses, and I'm kind of playing around the periphery of it right now. But for me, in my mind, that is exclusivity. As the Red Line releases were beginning to grow and grow, all of a sudden you started to see figures that were a Target exclusive or a Walmart exclusive, or you could only get this figure at Walgreens. And I think for people who are actively hunting and part of this hobby, there's kind of a fun aspect to that. You might go a little bit out of your beaten path to go track down that new figure that you're looking for. But for the most part, exclusives are hard to find. They're not made to the same scale as many of our mainline releases, meaning there's less of them. And to be honest, if I'm Walgreens and I get, a box of these new figures, I throw all 8 of them out on the shelves, and all the collectors who are crazy hunting them buy those up super quick, and then all of a sudden I don't have any more because I'm a pharmacy and my number one priority isn't stocking new toys on my shelf. So I think that was something that we started to see more and more and more of around the Red Line's time. And that's a weakness that's continued to today, as we're seeing more and more of these exclusive releases. And now today, many of those exclusive releases also are more expensive than the mainline releases. That's not something that we saw as much during the Red Line, but it's definitely, I think, a trend that began during that time, 2015 to 2018. And we've kind of continued to feel that today. And I know if you go in any comment section on, a Hasbro live stream or yakface.com, most of it is just people griping about hard to find exclusives. And while I think we have beaten that horse to death, many times over, I think the heart of that complaint is definitely legitimate. Now let's get into the ugly. Let's talk about a trend that I think really dominated this time. and that I think, thankfully, it has been overcome a little bit. But the main thing that I think the red line really struggled with was accessibility. For many collectors, it was hard to find the figures that you were looking for during this time. And I'm not just talking about exclusives either. I think there were mainline releases where you would never see it in store. And because the industry hadn't shifted to this more online pre-sale model, you might never actually get a chance to get that figure at a retail price of $20 to $25. And I think accessibility, especially in your big box stores, was kind of a growing pain again at this time. As the line was taking off, it was getting more popular, more and more people wanted these figures. All of a sudden, it was really hard to find them in stores. I can think of one specific example was Grand Admiral Thrawn. And this initial release was brought out in a wave for the red line. And my goodness, I don't think I ever saw this one in stores. I actually had my parents call me out of the blue once, and they said, hey, we were at Target, and we were looking at those action figures that I wish you wouldn't spend so much money on, and we found some. Are you interested in this blue guy in this Imperial uniform? And I was like, oh my goodness, yes, please buy that. I will pay you back. But I remember there were, specific figures that everyone wanted that were really, really hard to find. And I think, at least for our mainline Black Series releases, this has been something that has been rectified. Is there are now so many different retailers who offer a dedicated online pre-order system that, unless there is some kind of cancellation or worldwide global pandemic shipping crisis, then for the most part, you're going to be able to find that figure for its retail price and not have too many issues. But I remember for that 3-year span, it was a little bit of a struggle trying to find the figures that you wanted. And if you were a completionist, someone who wanted every single release, I know it was definitely a struggle to get every single figure that you were looking for, within stores. So all of that together is a quick, I don't know if it's quick, we're at like the 18-minute mark here, thanks for sticking around, but I think all of that together is a breakdown of the red line. I think this was a great 3 years for Black Series collectors, and really saw the growth and the expansion of the line into what we know it as today, both for better and honestly for worse. So let me know your thoughts in the comments below on this. Do you agree with this kind of summary? Do you agree with, the good, the bad, and the ugly, the different points there? What were some of your favorite releases from this line? I know for me, I'll include a couple below as a comment, but this is really when I got back into Star Wars collecting after many years. It was a real turning point for me in terms of Star Wars as a hobby and a passion. So I do look back on this time with a lot of fondness, maybe a little bit too much when it comes to nostalgia. But again, let me know your thoughts. I'd love to hear everyone else's impressions of this time period. And in our next video here, we'll actually look to start to transition into more of the modern line, the update to our Galaxy packaging, as well as some more sublines of the Black Series, like our deluxe releases, as well as what might lie ahead for the line in the years to come. So looking forward to that all. Thank you all for watching here, for sticking around to the end of this video. Wish you all the best for that, and encourage you to like it and subscribe to this channel if you're looking for more content like that. Would love to have you, would love your conversation, and just see this as a place to continue to grow the hobby. So thank you so much again.